1989 was the year the football card industry took off. Starting that year, football cards looked more modern than ever before. Both the fronts and the backs of the major 1989 sets looked really nice. This really was a step up from everything that had come before. And the most important thing is that this marked the end of the stranglehold that Topps had enjoyed on the football card market for decades. Now, you can really call 1989 the year that football cards grew up, and you wouldn't be far off the mark with that. Now, to understand this, we've got to look back at where things came from. As you probably already know, the early 1950s were known for the bubblegum card wars. That war between Bowman and Topps lasted from 1951 through 1955 and gave us some of the most attractive cards the industry has ever seen. What you might not know is that Bowman and Topps also briefly competed in the football card market. And what you might not realize is that Topps won its final victory over Bowman in football cards, not baseball cards. So the funny thing is that football cards were really treated as an afterthought back in those days, and you can really see it in the card design alone. For example, this 1948 Bowman Johnny Lujack is nothing more than a black and white picture. The overall design of the card is exactly the same as the 1948 Bowman baseball set. Bowman's 1951 football set at least had that interesting team logo, but it was still really similar to the baseball set. Topps tried a college football set of its own in 1951, though it wasn't anywhere near as spectacular as the Bowman set. And then Topps didn't come out with a single football card set again until 1955. And even then, Topps only gave us a college set that was filled mostly with players that had already retired. You see, Bowman had a complete monopoly in those days on the NFL card market. Now, that was kind of a problem for Bowman because the NFL just wasn't popular at all in the early 1950s. The blame for that lack of interest goes, at least in part, to the Dumont television network, which had the exclusive right to NFL television broadcasts from 1951 through 1955. In 1954 and 1955, NBC's broadcast of Canada's Big Four football teams often had better ratings than the NFL, which seems totally ridiculous in hindsight. Contemporary newspapers cited the popularity of teams like the Hamilton Tiger Cats in the United States, which really should surprise you. Meanwhile, the newspapers scoffed, noting that NBC would have televised Mexican bullfighting if Canadian football wasn't available. Anyway, if you want to know how Topps wound up beating Bowman's football card set, you really have to remember that the NFL just was not that popular at that time. So Bowman had the contract, sure, but it was a contract with a league that kids just didn't care about. I mean, 1955 Bowman football is not an awful set, though the design is a little bit strange. It even included a few play diagrams on the back of the cards, though this particular diagram is simply awful. The 1955 Topps All-American set, meanwhile, committed the cardinal sin of making cards of older players that were now retired. In general, card collectors just don't care about retrospective sets featuring players that played decades ago. But in this case, the NFL was so unpopular that Bowman wound up losing out, and so Topps bought out Bowman, and the rest is history. 1956 Topps looked a lot like 1955 Bowman, actually, but the Topps monopoly on professional football cards continued through 1960 when a new competitor came along. Fleer made a set of cards for American Football League teams, and we had competition in the football card market for the first time in half a decade. So some of you guys already know Topps and Fleer flipped leagues after a little while, and Fleer was eventually replaced by the Philadelphia Gum Company. In the end, though, Topps outlasted the competitors and wound up being the undisputed master of football bubblegum cards through the late 60s, the 1970s, and almost all of the 1980s. And the lack of competition was horrible for collectors. It's not that the sets looked hideous. For example, this 1970 Topps set doesn't really look all that bad. The card backs, however, were extremely low quality and were barely legible. But one thing you'll notice on these 1970 Topps cards is that there are no team logos anywhere. While Topps did have permission to use the names and images of the players, it no longer had permission from the NFL or the teams to use logos. And so the packaging had this really odd, almost anonymous feel to it, something that's really off-putting to collectors. So I'm not saying that you're going to find these cards for really cheap or anything like that. Supply was low and distribution was really, really bad. The cards of major stars in good condition are naturally going to be worth a lot of money. However, if you're into it because you like the cards, like how they look and all that stuff, these old Topps sets are really not going to be that attractive to you. For example, this 1981 Topps Jack Tatum card looks just wrong with that generic white helmet. And here's a 1978 O.J. Simpson highlight card that might as well have been a generic guy posing in a generic uniform. The majority of these cards are either headshots or shots taken from training camp. Some of the cards have lighting that was so bad you can't tell what it was supposed to show you, and other cards are just boring. Anyway, starting in 1976, Fleer got the rights from the NFL to make a set of team action shots. The Fleer team action sets lasted well over a decade. But of course, these weren't individual player cards. These were cards for a whole team with no names anywhere. It just doesn't feel like a real football card. And that's all that we had until 1989. That's right, 1989. You see, the thing is, 1989 is the year that changed everything. And I think that two companies are responsible. One that made football cards that year and one that didn't. Well, unless you're absolutely new to the world of American sports cards, you know all about this set, the 1989 Upper Deck baseball set. This set was revolutionary because it had vibrant colors and full action shots. The backs were also full color and usually featured a bit of action as well. The cards were marketed as a premium product and were priced accordingly. But of course, Upper Deck was not part of the football card market. In fact, Upper Deck didn't dip its toe into football cards until 1991. By that time, the industry had exploded with football card companies. Now, the thing about 1989 Upper Deck Baseball is that the company demonstrated that the way to dominate the market was to create a product that was specifically designed for collectors. That meant things like having no gum in the packs, and it also meant an emphasis on card quality above everything else. The other key player was Score. That was a company that is directly associated with the junk wax era in most people's minds. Score's 1988 baseball set was like a forerunner for Upper Deck. The focus of the set was on action photos on the cards, though they decided to keep those ugly borders. The backs were wide and clean looking and featured a bonus photo, something that was revolutionary in the baseball card world. And the promise of a new company with a clean looking new product caused dealers and collectors to pre-order these cards in droves. So I actually remember those days. It's kind of vague, but I do remember them. Back then, the experts would say that you should really hold on to your 1988 Score baseball set because it was going to be worth big money someday. After all, this was the first set that was issued by a brand new company, and the reasoning went, we all know what happened to 1952 Topps baseball cards, right? Well, the thing is that if you did hold on to your 1988 Score baseball set, I really feel bad for you. It's almost certainly worth less today than it was worth back then. But the 1989 Score football cards, well, that's a different story. I'm going to go out on a limb right now and say the 1989 Score is the best looking football card set of the 1980s. These cards are fantastic, both front and back, and the design is really top notch. And the rookie cards in this set are legendary. Plus, there's a big challenge in trying to find copies of these cards that can receive high grades from the grading companies. So this is an ugly part of the modern collecting experience, but I do have to talk about it. Look, the thing is that 1989 Score Football is a great set whether it's graded or not. But one reason why people go nuts over this set is because it's really hard to find score cards that will grade at a PSA 10. And when you do find them, the demand is really high. And there's some pretty strong evidence out there that Score's first football set was likely short printed. If you want to buy a wax box to crack on like your YouTube channel, it's going to cost you about $1,500. Even boxes like this one that might have been tampered with will cost you quite a bit of money. In comparison, a sealed and verified 1989 Topps football box will cost you about 10% of what the scorecards cost. Yeah, so I know part of this comes from the demand and the hunt for the magical rookie cards, but frankly, part of this is also old-fashioned supply and demand, and the supply was low. So remember this part, if unopened boxes are worth a ton of money, you're going to see a lot of people who owe them go out to sell them. The more people that sell these unopened boxes, the more competition you see among sellers, and the more the prices will naturally sink. But if there are not a ton of boxes out there at all, you're going to end up having to pay more money to get the cards because the prices don't sink. And that's what's happening here. The supply is low and the demand is really high. And that's true here, even though this is technically a junk wax set. Of course, the fact that the Topps cards are as ugly as sin has something to do with the lack of demand. Topps simply did not know how to make a good-looking card either front or back. At least the logos were there, which is something, but you had to deal with the bubble gum. And you had to deal with the fact that tons and tons of these cards were made. This is really around the time that the Topps juggernaut was finally losing its grip. Topps had taken hits in the baseball card industry for years, and it had done so poorly at basketball cards that it gave up that entirely in the early 1980s. And now its football monopoly was about to die out, and in a year its hockey monopoly would die as well. This really was the golden age of sports cards, or sports card collecting, that is. And there's one company in particular that really took advantage of all of this. Articles came out as early as July 1989 about a new set of cards by a company called ProSet, and its accidental errors were already making headlines. So Refrigerator Perry was not supposed to have a ProSet card printed, but they printed one in the first printing anyway. It's worth quite a bit of money in top condition these days, and is one of the most valuable cards from a set that was overprinted to oblivion. Chances are that you've got some 1989 and 1990 ProSet football cards somewhere in your house, even if you don't collect cards. These things have a tendency to spawn on their own. Either that, or maybe they grow outside in abandoned fields along with the other weeds. I haven't quite figured that part out yet. So the official story was that ProSet's founder, Ludwig Denny, wanted to revolutionize football cards the way that Upper Deck revolutionized baseball cards. As this old Globe and Mail article notes, football cards had never made up more than 10% of the hobby market before 1989, but Denny wanted to change all that. And Denny had a reputation for creating error cards that were designed to get a lot of attention, which is kind of like what Upper Deck did back in 1989. And like Upper Deck, ProSet proceeded to print as many cards as humanly possible in hopes of profiting off of the additional collector demand. For example, this 1989 Upper Deck Dale Murphy card was famous back in those days because it was printed backwards. This is what the card was supposed to look like. A few months after Upper Deck Baseball was officially released, that Dale Murphy Air card was selling for almost $200, boosted in large part by the rumor that only 20,000 existed. Denny ran with that idea, creating what he considered to be a living set. For example, Jim McMahon received two cards, one that said he was traded to the Chargers on the front, and another one missing that designation. The back was supposed to have a reference to card 44, which features him on the Chicago Bears. However, there is also a variation without the reference to card 44, which is the more valuable version. And of course, they kept in card number 44 anyway with McMahon on the Bears. So who cares that the same player has two base cards in the same set anyway? That sort of thing makes ProSet really confusing to collect, and it makes getting a master set very, very difficult. Except, of course, that there are tons and tons and tons of these cards everywhere you look. I really mean that too. I'm not joking when I say that they printed these cards like Zimbabwe prints money. The nice thing these days about 1989 ProSet is that you can get the cards for cheap. I'm serious, a case of ProSet wax boxes costs less than a box of Score. While it's not the cheapest junk wax box out there, it's not a bad deal for the price, and the cards are really attractive. If all you're interested in is just in collecting cards, this is a really fun set to get. In fact, ProSet was the early king of the insert cards, so the 1989 set has basically every kind of insert and special set imaginable. I mean, they really went all out with this one. They made cards for the announcers. And the cool thing is that even the announcer cards have action shots, which is a lot better than 1989 Topps. They also made these commemorative Super Bowl set of cards. I remember these since I had a ton of them, and I honestly don't know how I got them. Anyway, most famous of all was this Santa Claus card. These were only sent to dealers as a promo and are legitimately scarce and hard to find. And no, this price is not a joke or a ripoff. So it's pretty good for an overproduced set, right? Now, we do need to talk about this concept of printing to oblivion. So the thing is that ProSet printed its cards like crazy because there was a lot of demand for the cards. Dealers were selling these things left and right, the stores were selling out of packs, and people really liked the cards. Now, I've read all sorts of stuff online from people who act like the companies just didn't care if the cards sold or not in the 80s and 90s, and that's just not true. The truth is that the junk wax era happened because speculation on these cards was big. And that happened because people legitimately thought that sports cards were going to be the new 401k. And that is the reason why you can still find so much sealed product out on the market. A glance through any newspaper will tell you that cards were serious business. The yearly National Sports Convention grew like crazy, going from about 6,400 attendees in 1980 up to well over 30,000 in 1989. In 1989, the big draw to the National was the unveiling of the new ProSet cards. And notice down here how Ludwig Denny talks about doing market research to figure out what collectors wanted to see in football cards and then focusing on giving it to them. As much as I really want to complain about the junk wax era, Denny really had a point. And as much as I want to complain about the modern era of card collecting, the truth is that these companies have learned a lot over the past few decades. But unfortunately, we can't really say companies anymore, can we? But that monopoly is a problem for a different video. The summer of 1989 was filled with hype for these Pro Set cards, hype to an extreme extent, something we had never seen before in football cards. For a brand new company that nobody had ever heard of, Pro Set sure did a good job of getting its name in papers around North America. And the thing is that you never knew quite what you were getting when you bought one of these packs. Honestly, if you just want to collect good-looking cards from this era, my advice is to go with Pro Set. The set is bigger than Score, so there's more cards to get, more players, and there are enough variations and like really wacky things in this set to really keep your interest. But if what you care about is the money, the obvious choice is Score. So the thing is that Pro Set was designed to be mass printed from the very get-go. Check out this letter to the Cleveland Browns, where NFL Properties boasts that well over 100,000 cases of Pro Set would be distributed in by December 1989, or in less than 6 months. Score packs, meanwhile, were hard to find anywhere, and to this day nobody really knows how many were printed. Now, the NFL likely saw Pro Set as a really cheap advertising campaign, and the cards have always been cheap. This is probably why I wound up with so many of them when I was a kid. But there are also reasons to consider Score the superior set. The Score rookies, like this Deion Sanders, really are iconic looking cards, and Score made sure that you knew it was a rookie card. The Pro Set Deion card, meanwhile, didn't quite have the same personal touch on the front, but the Pro Set back looks better, there's no doubt about that. Meanwhile, Deion's Topps card came in the traded set and it is utterly boring. And as usual, the back looks like hot garbage. So there's probably no surprise that the Score card attracts a high price and great condition. The Pro Set card is nowhere near as expensive, even in top condition, and this is a set that is also really condition sensitive. And the Topps card winds up last in terms of market value. Now, did any of that really matter to the companies? Well, not really. Remember, these companies were not directly selling on the secondary market, at least in theory. There is some evidence that Upper Deck was doing that in baseball cards, and I have a pretty strong feeling that Pro Set was doing that with football cards as well. The other thing, though, is that it's clear that the football card market had quickly evolved away from where Topps always thought that it was. And that honestly was a great thing for the industry, even if it does mean that there's a ton of Pro Set product out there. 1989 Score will always be the most iconic football set from 1989, that's for sure. But don't overlook 1989 Pro Set, which was an absolutely revolutionary set for its time. Even if billions of these cards were printed, I still think these cards are tons of fun and are worth the effort to collect. As for Topps, well, the less we say about this set, the better. But of course, that was just the beginning. Now, 1990 saw even more companies enter the football set world, and by 1991, there were so many major football sets that it's seriously hard to keep track of them. And I'm going to do my best to keep track of them for you in future videos. So stay tuned to this channel, there's a lot of really good and interesting stuff coming really soon.